From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
Attorneys at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. And it's Tuesday, and that means FLA Law on the radio is here again for another episode. As our faithful listeners may know, the last few weeks I've been by myself, and so we've been doing Hey Matts. But tonight I'm blessed to have a friend and a colleague here, Patrick Gaffney. He's here also to help answer your questions regarding his area of law. And his area of law is family law. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But Patrick, thank you very much for coming in again this evening to share your time with our listeners.
Well, Matt, thanks for the invitation. It's my privilege to spend some time with you and help your listeners maybe learn a little bit about family law.
Yeah, I think it would be really good. We're here for the next hour. So please, if you have questions regarding family law, give us a call. Patrick's here to answer your questions. And if it's personal injury, workers' comp, or even Social Security and disability, I can address those questions. And if it's a question that's none of those categories, Patrick and I can work together. And I think we can come up with an answer, at least give you some guidance of where to go to get that answer. But how do you reach us? There's two ways really to reach us. One is by calling us. This is a live radio show, so you can call us live on the radio at 727-441-3000. Or if you don't want to have your question on the radio, your voice on the radio, you can jump onto the law firm's Facebook page, and we're doing a live feed right now. So you can see us and hear us on Facebook. And that page is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. And you can type in your question right there. And Patrick and I are looking at the screen right now, and we can answer the questions that you have. So really two ways. By Facebook at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers, or by calling live at 727-441-3000. So before we take our call, Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? I know you've been a lawyer, since 1983. Is that right?
Yeah, that'd be over 40 years now.
We call that experiences.
Yeah, it's been a real journey to start with the state attorney's office. At that time, the state attorney's name was James T. Russell. He was kind of short in stature, but kind of a very interesting person to work under him. And he used to always write in green ink whenever you got something that was from him was in green ink.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Then, of course, one of his chief assistants was Bernie McCabe, who later ran and became the state attorney and did very well in that, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And one of his chief assistants, Bruce Bartlett, who I also had worked under, is now the state attorney. And I think he's an excellent lawyer, prosecutor, and that background of coming out of law school and prosecuting cases was a great experience for a young person. I got to meet a lot of people that are, some of my colleagues that I work with are now judges and several lawyers, and got to see a high quality of lawyering. And I'll just share this with you also. Sure. One of the things about the criminal justice system is when you have a division in the criminal justice division of the circuit court, you have prosecutors assigned and you have public defenders assigned. So a lot of times as a prosecutor, I'd be trying cases against the same public defenders. And what's interesting is that the lawyers, even on opposite sides of the case, the public defenders and the prosecutors became kind of professionally appropriate. That is to say, you formed trust, friendships. You try your case, but it doesn't become personal.
Right.
And since we're talking about family law, I just thought I'd segue there, because one of the challenges of family law is that when a lawyer takes on the personality and doesn't give professional detachment to the client. Right. And then what you find up doing is you're always arguing with the other attorney about things because it's become personal.
Right.
That's something that is foreign or was foreign to me in my background because every time I try a case against an assistant public defender, we'd always end up being friends. But sometimes in family law, it gets personal, and that's unfortunate. I try real hard for that not to occur when I'm in a case, but sometimes it does happen.
Yeah, and that trust, that's unfortunately in family law that the trust is broken between the parties, and so it could carry on into the attorney. They may want you to be that aggressive, stereotypical divorce attorney.
Well, it's an interesting point about family law, is I believe some attorneys market themselves that way. They pick out a niche where they think the perception of the public is I need to be nasty and I need to be difficult. But, ultimately what I tell clients and people is that's kind of just a myth, because ultimately you're going to find yourself in front of a judge if you can't settle this case. And that judge is not going to countenance or let you get away with acting nasty to each other in their presence. I mean, you got to be professional. And so you might as well start that presentation of professional behavior right from the get-go.
I agree 100%. We see those in personal injury too. You can see the TV lawyers sometimes have bulldogs and all that. It's like, that doesn't really help a client.
No, it just markets to them, and it appeals to their lower nature, their animal nature, of and maybe what they think a lawyer should be that they saw on television. But as you and I know, you've done this a long time as well, is that just puts you in the wrong direction.
It does. I mean, ultimately, you're trying to reach that goal of closure and sasatisfaction.
Right. And sometimes in family law, particularly, we're talking about families.
Right.
So, we, for the most part, as you know, we received our common law from the country of England. And a lot of the rules that we even follow today derive from that source. So we have an adversarial system where you have, petitioner and respondent, plaintiff and defendant, and it's always adversarial. In a lot of ways, that approach to family law is very inefficient because we're dealing with families.
Right.
If at all possible, what we try to do is not make parents of children enemies, because who's going to be the beneficiary of that hate and difficulty? It's going to be those kids.
Right. We
also try not to put kids in the middle of this. I mean, I had a call today where a mother was saying, I want my child to testify before the judge. And I said, you be careful what you wish for, because that's generally not something the court is inclined to do for the benefit of the child. Who wants to put a child between their parents and so they have that memory for the rest of their life? So you got, part of doing family law is common sense. It's also part of how do we do something that involves people where we try not to make enemies. We're not trying to make necessarily, just roll over and play dead and just let the other side get their way. But at the same time, try to reach that happy medium where we're advocates, but we're advocates professionally, and we don't have to hate the other lawyer.
Right.
We don't have to treat the other lawyer badly or speak badly about them. We just have to be appropriate. And this is something that's a life's journey. I think I'm much better at doing this kind of stuff now than when I came out of law school over 40 years ago. It's something you learn about the law, the judges, the people. You try to talk to your clients and try to find out what they really want. And sometimes it's easy to find out what they want, but they don't really know how to get there.
Right.
What most people had, you said a word earlier, you said closure. It's important, I think, for people going through conflict to have closure, or else they have a gaping wound in their life that never away.
Heals. Right.
And I run into these people, and if I'm talking too much, you can just stop me.
No.
But I run into people that, they had an unfortunate marriage that ended in a divorce, and they have young children, and they just cannot find a way to co-parent in a way that's peaceful.
Right.
It's always suspicion, no trust, thinking the worst of each other. So,
what do you do in those situations?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I'm involved in a case, maybe more than one case like that right now, where, I was talking about the adversarial system. So if we follow the system, we take depositions, we go to court, and we let the judge decide, and that is all the way our system works, and there's nothing wrong with that except a few things. One is it costs a lot of money to litigate. most people do not have that kind of money. And if they do, they shouldn't be spending it in that direction.
Right.
It would be much better spent on their children's college than it would be
Right.
on lawyers fighting with each other. So, that's point number one. Point number two, I don't think it's an effective model really for resolving conflict. A very strong argument can be made that litigation in family law matters makes things worse, because what happens after you have taken a client or opposing client's deposition, after you've cross-examined them before the court, it's kind of hard to make up and make things normal again.
Right.
And so I try real hard, and I'm not always successful, to try to resolve cases. There's some concept of a reasonable resolution, a reasonable compromise. That's okay, because life is compromise.
Right.
Life is give and take. The people in this world that just want it their way and no other way, I don't think they get very far.
No, I agree with you. And it is years of wisdom of being able to go through all kinds of scenarios and finding out what's best. And I think one thing about you, Patrick, is a little bit different than other family law attorneys is that you're board certified. Can you explain to our listeners what does it mean to be board certified in family law?
Well, Matt, thanks for bringing that up. Every 5 years you have to be recertified, and I've been board certified since 1995. There are plenty of very good lawyers who are not board certified, so I'm not going to say it's essential. But if you're the type of person sort of like I am, which is sort of goal-oriented, you want to achieve the highest level you can in the profession, one of the things you might consider doing, like I said, you don't have to do it, but one thing I did, is you go through this board certification process where you fill out an application. It requires other lawyers in the community to write recommendations for you, judges in the community to do that as well.
And lawyers that you went up against.
Correct. That in the community. And and then you take a test. And if you pass the test, you get the board certification. Now, every 5 years, you don't have to retake the test, but you have to get recertified. You also have to take a certain number of continuing legal education credits and keep up with the law that way. So, there's a very small percentage. At one point, it was 2% of all the lawyers in Florida are board certified. I'm quite sure what the percentage is now.
I think that's still close to the percentage.
Something like it. So, like I said, I think it's just something to show that you have a mind towards trying to do what you do.
And a dedication to do the best that you can do.
Well, I have this concept in my personal life. I think about the concept of a vocation in life. That's something that you're put on this earth, that the higher power that God put you here to do, which is, in my mind, of course, I don't know that I'm getting all of this right, but the way I perceive it, this is what I'm meant to do. So it deserves, from my point of view, the highest level of effort and diligence that I can reasonably put forth on it. And that's what I've tried to do. And that's what board certification to me just reflects my desire to do that.
Right.
So
I think that's good. Yeah. That's Patrick Gaffney. He is a family law attorney here in Clearwater. We are live on the radio. So if you have a question regarding family law, give us a call at 727-441-3000 or jump on the firm's Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, Injury Lawyers. And we're here live. You can see us a live feed, and you can type in your question right there. Patrick, just like in personal injury, when we hear the word personal injury, it encompasses all types of cases. It could be auto accident, it could be trip and falls, slip and falls, workers' comp, and all those other types of things. And just like it's a family law specialist, what types of family law cases do you handle mostly?
Okay, thank you for the question.
It's like a big umbrella under family law, and then there's all these little raindrops.
I might just say this, and I think it's true with you as well, Matt, is that, one of the benefits of our profession is we get to interact and to have the privilege of seeing people maybe at their worst, so at their most difficult. I know you deal with like injured people that their lives have been severely compromised. And one of the aspects of that I think is so rewarding is when you see someone that is in difficult situation, maybe physically or, in just the personal situation there, and they persevere. It gives you really hope for the human spirit.
I agree 100%.
And I think, and what you do, you see that maybe when I see that, I'll see that, for example, in a family where a mother's not received child support or alimony, and she's working every day, taking on it. She's a nurse. She's taking on extra shifts, and we maybe in our lives, some of our mothers worked, and we saw what they sacrificed for. But to see that every day and see how people sacrifice for their family, it really encourages me to continue doing this work and to try to help people through it. So in my work, to answer your question, is divorce, paternity, namely. I am also a mediator where I work with other lawyers, where I try to assist them in settling their cases. I do wills and trusts, and I do some probate of estates. So, it's just kind of an interesting thing that when you look at human nature and how people get along or interact with each other, in family law, it's a lot of husbands and wives. And now with same-sex marriage, we have a lot of same-sex marriage divorces as well. But in probate, for example, you can have family members that are not married to each other, typically brothers and sisters or aunts and uncles and cousins, nephews. They're also in a dynamic of relatedness to each other, but they're fighting about, with each other about money.
And they're mourning a loss of a loved one is too. So
yeah,
they're emotionally damaged as well. I mean, I deal with a lot of physically damaged people that are also have a mental component of it because of the injury. But you have to deal with people that are emotionally scarred or damaged.
I talk
in every area of your law.
Well, I talk like today. I talked to a woman who was expressing to me that she felt that she was psychologically or mentally abused, although not physically abused, and explained some of the things that her husband was saying to her and doing to her. And, a relationship like that is very damaging to someone. I mean, it doesn't have to be physical.
Right.
It can be self-esteem. In a certain type of personality, I hear this word daily, the word narcissist, someone who's so self-centered.
I thought the election was over. No, I'm teasing.
But, if you pick the wrong person to have a child with or to be married with, and it becomes something that's a negative kind of thing in your life, it is damaging. It's psychologically damaging. We can't always see. Sometimes if someone looks okay, we just say, oh, that person's fine. But, I've had the privilege of knowing veterans that are, from Vietnam, who they look fine. They're in their 70s now, and I play tennis with a guy, but he has to go to group. He has to go to group every so often because those things that happened when he was 19 years old in Vietnam, they stay with you.
Right.
And they never leave. And it's a type of disability. But that happens in family law as well. I mean, if you're in a negative situation, and I'm sure it happens in your work with personal injury, where people are not just physically injured.
Wow.
This physical injury, this accident, it has had a psychological component to it that lingers long after the accident occurs.
Right. And the same thing. And I mean, I think although family law and personal injury are two totally different areas of law, it's kind of the same thing in certain respects, is because you do have somebody who's been injured or mentally, physically, and they too have to go through a horrible process fighting with the insurance company, trying to get closure so they can put it behind them and try to adjust to their new normal. And after an injury, most people have a new normal. They can't do the things they used to be able to do. They can't enjoy the activities that they used to be able to do. They can't, just do the simple things that were simple tasks now become horrible chores. And I think that's kind of like in family law too. They were used to living this way, and then all of a sudden something happens, and now they have to adjust to a new normal. Am I right on that?
Yeah, what's interesting to reflect upon is change. There can be violent change. We have had these hurricanes that have hit us in this part of Florida.
Right.
They're not things that we wanted. There's earthquakes. The platelets of the earth shifting is one form of change, and then there's more of a gradual change. When I'm dealing with someone in a family law situation, a lot of it is sort of a sudden change. sometimes it's brewed over a decade and it's always been there, but something happens and it's something that now is a big deal all of a sudden. And I'm sure with your work, if someone gets into an unexpected accident, it's like, where did that come from?
Exactly.
And so part of what we all have to deal with, everybody has to deal with, is change. And I know this much about myself. I'm not always good at accepting change. I kind of like things.
I think that's why you and I get along very well.
I kind of like the old school stuff. I like doing the things, but we have to accept change.
Right.
And I think that's the tough part for a lot of people coming in to see me. It's, if they've been married a long time, not only are they going to have to sort out their finances and sort out their parenting plan to determine how they're going to share time, but their whole identity as a married person now changes to a single person.
Right.
Their whole way of living, how they perceive themselves and how the society deals with them is going to be much different than it was when they were married. Many times, for example, a couple will have other couples as friends. Divorce happens. Okay, well, who are they friends with now?
Right.
And somebody in that divorcing couple is going to be left out.
Right.
So it's an interesting time to accept change, how you deal with change. And I think it's not just a legal thing. I think it's how people perceive their life, how good they are at adapting to change, what they, their spiritual life, how they look at life. And, sometimes, we can say nothing happens that God doesn't allow to happen. These things happen. We have to accept them. We can negate them. And I had a client this week who had retained me, but then wouldn't get in touch with me. And I was at the verge of withdrawing from his case because he just wouldn't communicate. I thought I'd call real quick right before the withdrawal hearing to say, hey, what's going on here? And he did answer. And he did share with me that, hey, listen, this divorce has really knocked me for a loop. I didn't want to deal with it. I just kind of denied it. And so I stayed on the case. Hopefully it works out that way. But it just goes to show you that change is constant.
Right.
We're seeing that in the recent election. There's going to be big changes to the way things are done. But I like the analogy, Matt, of a hurricane. And I sometimes use that when I talk to people, prospective clients. You're going through life and all of a sudden there's trouble. And the forecast, the meteorologist is saying it's going to be a big storm.
Okay.
And so how do we deal with that? I mean, I think a lot of us Floridians have been dealing with this, quite recently. But
Right.
it can provoke, and it has provoked in many people, an anxiety, just like a pending lawsuit, a pending divorce. And so I would suggest that a lot of the coping mechanisms that people use when they're under anxious circumstances, stressful circumstances, can either be positive for them, such as exercise, meditation, whatever that's being outside, doing things that are healthy to deal with anxiety, or it can lead to drinking more, doing drugs, and of course, that's more of a negative thing. So,
Right.
The whole area of what we do for a living and how we interact with people is a broad subject of how we live our life and how we deal with change.
Right. And what I think you made a perfect example of how it's important to, that in family law and in personal injury law as well, it's not black and white. It's not every person reacts the same way. Like your client who just couldn't handle it, other attorneys would just walked away and say, okay, he's not calling me back. I'm closing up. But you appreciate the fact that, everybody handles the situation or the change in a different way, and you adjust for your clients. And I think that's admirable. So
Well, thanks for the other thing I just say is a lot of times I get phone calls or a conference with someone and they want to know what's going to happen. And family law in particular is very much based on what the facts actually are. How much is in your husband's 401k? How much does he make relative to you? And, I often get, well, my girlfriend has told me with her case, this is what they did. And can we do that in my case? And it's like, no, look, that's a totally different situation.
right.
And I don't know if you get this.
All the time.
It's like, I talk to my neighbor and they tell me that this is the way we should do it. And a good example, I had a client this week said, my girlfriend who's had another difficult case, she said we should do a motion for summary judgment. In family law, that's very difficult because, as you know, a motion for summary judgment is only appropriate when the facts are not in controversy.
Right.
And in family law,
Everything's in controversy.
the facts are typically always in controversy.
Right.
So she heard this and she thought, that's what we should do. But I had to spend some time. But this is not what people do. They listen to their friends and neighbors who have totally, if not totally, at least partially different facts that lead to a different result and different legal advice. So
Google Esquire is also a culprit that
is that
would
right?
say people. Well, I researched it, and Google told me I should do X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, A, that's not Florida law, and B, that's a computer telling you how to handle your personal case. So I don't know if you see that in family law as well.
I tell you what comes down to for most people. So most of the people I represent are not billionaires, and they may be well into their middle income type people, but to go through a contested divorce is a very expensive proposition. And a lot of times we have to make a decision, do we want to go there and take the risk? So just like when you go to trial in your area of the law, personal injury, you probably get a settlement offer from an insurance company. It may not be very good, or it may be, but ultimately you have to let the risk of that fall on the client.
Right.
So it's like, they've offered us this is what I think, but can I guarantee it to you? I can't in your case, right? Because a jury is going to determine that.
You never know.
So in my case, it's like, okay, I've looked at the new alimony statute. We have a new alimony. I've analyzed the financial. From my perspective, it looks like you're a candidate for alimony, and I would advocate for you to receive that. Well, can you promise me I'm going to get it? No, I can't. I mean, when you start doing that, you're outside of your.
Right.
So it's always an interesting thing, and in maybe all areas of the law, that the client has to do a risk aversion kind of test of how much do I want to risk to get the outcome. And some people are very risk averse. They'll take all kinds of risks. So you were sharing with me that you were on a cruise boat where there was some gambling, and some people will go into a gambling situation and put all their mortgage, their house on it, and other people won't even get up to the table.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that clients, I think in every area of the law, have to decide, okay, it's not only risk, it's cost benefit.
Exactly.
How much am I going to pay, or in your case, maybe potentially lose, if I take that risk? And how do I feel about that? Can I accept it if I take the risk and I don't get what I want? Can I live with that? And if I can't, then maybe I should just take the deal.
Right. And it's funny you say that, because I have a cost benefit analysis discussion with my client at least once a week, sometimes 3 times a week, because of that same situation. When we get to their final offer, you have to do a cost benefit analysis to see whether or not it's worth litigating it further or resolving the issues.
So, for example, I'll turn the table and ask you a question. So you have an offer from an insurance company, but yet it might be an involved case to try. There's maybe experts, doctors, right. And of course, doctors who are typical witnesses in personal injury cases are not inexpensive to have witnesses. Someone's got to put up the cost, which I'm assuming might be you, and yet you got to go over this with the client, say, hey, listen, we're going to put this witness up. It's going to cost us a bunch of money. I have no guarantee it's going to happen, but I feel good about it. But it's your risk,
right? And then you have to analyze how much more a jury would have to award for you to net the same amount if you settle today.
Because you got to pay the costs.
Because you can avoid those costs if you settle today. So it is cost benefit analysis, and not just in personal injury, but in family law and everything. Now, one thing I hear about family law is one complaint, so to speak, is that, gosh, it just takes too long. Can you tell our listeners, approximately what's the process of a divorce and how long does it take? I set you up for that one because I know what the lawyer answer is.
Well, we have, when you file for divorce, you're randomly assigned a section in the family law division of Tampa, Clearwater, Newport Richey. I was told by a judge in Newport Richey recently that we tried to set a case for trial because we couldn't settle it. And, my approach is, we try to settle everything. But if it's not going to settle, you might as well set it for trial because it's just going to sit there otherwise.
Puts pressure on them.
In that case, we tried to set that case for trial a couple of weeks ago. The judge said, look, I don't have any trial dates available anytime soon. We'll call you when we got a trial date. And it's probably going to be March or April of next year.
Wow.
And that's in West Pasco County, Newport Richey. There's only 2 family law judges there now, and the population, according to this judge who was talking to me, has exploded, but they haven't increased any judges there. So depending on where you live, but in a more normalized circumstance, other than West Pasco, what you would typically do is, you retain the lawyer. Talking about the time it takes. One of the segments of that time is that the client has to prepare and put together a significant amount of financial paperwork. We're talking about tax returns, pay stubs, credit card statements, and the like. And then prepare a financial affidavit. As you know, a financial affidavit is under oath, so you have to be careful and correct in how you do that. So we send the client away. They bring us back this information. And typically, I have a staff that goes through it, and we're always asking our own clients for more information, clarification, corrections. So that takes time.
Sure.
Put that together, put it with a summons and a petition, send it to our process server who files it and serves. Once the respondent, it gets served, well, then what you have is 20 days to file a response and 45 days to file his documents or her documents, who's ever the respondent. So we're in the middle of November, so 45 days, we're into next year, right?
Yes.
Before we even have to exchange documents. So, a lot of people, I'm unhappy, I want this divorce right now. It's a process.
Right.
And it's important to do the process steps because you cannot have a valid agreement that's accepted by the court that has not been the product of full disclosure. So we have rules of civil procedure and family law procedure that allow us to actually set aside final judgments of dissolution of marriage because there was something that was not disclosed.
Oh, goodness.
And so we have to go back and we have to deal with that issue. Now, that doesn't happen all that often because I think most times people do tell everything they have, but every once in a while we get caught up in litigation to do that. So I would say the typical divorce, to go through all of that, and also you have to go to mediation. Once you've exchanged your documents, both sides, the typical thing is the lawyers will talk and agree on a mediator. The mediator, sets a time. It's typically done by Zoom. One of the things about this whole pandemic that I think has been helpful is we've gotten more efficient in some of the things we used to do. We do pretty much anything that's not evidentiary is done by Zoom, which the public may not recognize this, but there were times in years past where I had to spend an hour going to a 15-minute hearing or a 10-minute hearing because I had to drive there, park there, get up there. It's not really substantive, but it takes time. We can save that time. Same thing with mediation, although it's an interesting argument to be made that you're still better off to do a physical mediation with the people there because there's nothing like that association, like you and I are sitting looking at each other. It's different than if you and I were on Zoom.
Right.
We wouldn't have the same connection. And that's the argument. And I'm sure you do a bunch of mediations in personal injury.
We do a whole bunch of mediations. And I think I'm in the minority when I say I hate Zoom mediations. I want to do live. I'll drive just to do live mediations for that purpose.
Now, with the defense lawyers, will they agree to that?
No.
Because they're getting paid hourly, and,
right?
And
they won't get paid for
efficient.
the travel and such.
I think it's an interesting question. Some of the things we do for efficiency, it's all well and good, and for many cases, it's great. But there are situations that I think you're familiar with that you really want to have the physical presence of a person to convey. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're talking to the mediator because you're typically in a caucus separated from the other side. But the client gets to talk to the mediator, and then the mediator gets to go in that other room and convey this kind of viscerally that really doesn't translate when you're doing Zoom.
Right. No, I agree. And my clients feel like they get to talk to the mediator. If in person, they feel like they really get to tell their story. They get their day in court, so to speak, by talking to the mediator. And it's just a little different than talking to a mediator face to face as opposed to the mediator on the big screen TV.
You said something there that kind of resonates with me about everyone has to have something. If it's not that actual trial, they have to have an event. I'm just talking generally. Most people, when they have a conflict like a lawsuit, it's helpful to them, and they expect to have something like a mediation or I don't know, whatever else it could be, short of a trial, so they can kind of vet those emotions and meet their expectations to some degree.
They get to be heard.
Exactly. And they want to be heard, and they want to have someone listen to them. And then the case is somewhat easier to resolve once that event has happened. But getting back to your original question, which I think was how long does this take?
Yeah.
You know, an interesting point is if you wanted to set a mediation, like I'm doing one real soon, we had to set that mediation months ago. So, you know, a lot of times before even the disclosure, which remember is got 45 days to be done, we'll get with the other lawyers and say, look, we don't want to wait till then. Let's assume you're going to give us what we need. Let's set the mediation now so that once we have it, we don't have to wait so long. Because people do want closure. People do want to have it done. And a lot of times the benefit is through mediation to have that, you know, day in court.
Does that work for you, though, to have mediation scheduled in advance? We try to do that in personal injury, and they never allow us to do that. They want to.
I think it does because, you know, if you don't have the documents necessary to mediate,
Then you postpone the
you
mediation.
can always reschedule.
That's about it.
And, you know, we're trying to just be efficient because I don't think people want to spend long periods. They don't want a 6-month divorce. They don't want a year divorce. I mean, sometimes with difficult issues, there's two difficult issues that are more typical to go to court. One is alimony.
Okay.
Now, we have an alimony statute now that was passed in July of 23, which was supposed to make it more easy to resolve, but nobody wants to pay alimony. And the other is child parenting, issues of whether, we do also that same law that, dealt with alimony also dealt with a presumption of equal time sharing in parenting cases, which again was sort of overall purpose is, hey, let's make this easier to resolve, because before that law was passed, the argument was, you get a different result from a judge in Pensacola than you do in Miami or Orlando or Tampa. And so we want a uniformity of result. And the way we approach this is, we have now this statute. But despite the fact that we have that statute, if a case is going to trial, for the most part, it's either, and at least in my experience, to do with spousal support, attorney's fees, which is an element of spousal support, or time sharing.
Okay. Wow. And there are ways to avoid going to trial. We talked about mediation. Are there other ways to avoid having to go to trial and still get the resolution?
Well, for example, we do utilize outside professionals to come into these family law cases because no one is an expert on everything. For example, in family law parenting disputes, we'll bring in a psychologist, a guardian ad litem, a parenting coordinator. These are people that
That's
have
interesting. Yeah.
to come in and give, a guardian will listen to the parties, their collaterals, and make a report and make a recommendation to the court. The court doesn't have to accept that recommendation, but it's helpful because the judge isn't going to go out and talk to people. So that's
Do the parties get to see that guardianship report?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
Not, sometimes a guardian will send I've had it where a guardian has sent a report and said, you can allow your client to read it, but don't let him take the client report, because they don't want the children to see what the guardian has recommended, the negative things that the guardian may have said about a parent. So we have the guardian will come in. We have a parenting coordinator, which is when, there's some folks, unfortunately, that have difficulty communicating. Their history is such, something happened that maybe there's a new someone in someone's life and it's just not rubbing them right. And everything is negative. It's good to have a parenting coordinator who is basically, again, a professional. Sometimes it's a mental health professional, sometimes it's a lawyer, but typically mental health, that comes in and helps these people function, helps them either form a parenting plan or abide by a parenting plan, so their life is just not negative all the time. I mean, I see these people, young people that are divorced, whose life you would never want to have because it is constant conflict. So we do bring in someone to help with that.
And I think those reports would be helpful to get closure as well, to get an agreement. If the parties get to see those reports, they can have an idea what the judge may rule and then reach some type of agreement if possible.
I try to be real careful to say I never know what a judge is going to do, and I can't tell you what the judge is going to do in this case. I mean, I've had many cases with this judge, and I feel the judge is going to be fair and listen, but I don't get consistent results all the time. That's one of the best arguments for settling your case.
Right.
Is that if you're risk averse and you want to go take a risk, we'll do it.
Yeah.
But think about it, because you can't always guarantee what a judge would do. Another professional that I mentioned but didn't go into is like a psychologist who will do either an evaluation of the parties and make a report to the court, or do a social investigation where they look at the environment in which the children are living and again make recommendations. So when a professional like that makes a recommendation, we have a very long statute of the different factors that go into determining how we decide which parent should have time sharing and what type of time sharing we should be having for this family. And so it's like when the court has to do this, there has to be finding as a fact. So a final judgment in a contested divorce where there has to be finding is typically a long one because the judge has gone through every factor.
Okay.
But we can avoid that because, I think most people who are psychologically well, because there's always going to be outliers who are not well,
Sure.
and they cause problems. They want to have closure, and they'll accept a reasonable compromise.
And we've been talking about that new statute about, it's presumption that it's equal
Yes.
child care, child custody and time sharing.
Yeah.
What factors come into play that would change that presumption or rebut that presumption?
Okay, so that's the right word, rebut, because what it provides is this is a starting point. So the starting point is equal time sharing, but not everyone can do equal time sharing. So for example, I represent a nurse. She starts work at 7 a.m, has to get there at 6:30. Daycares don't open that early. So maybe she can't do the overnight preceding that because she can't get the kids to a daycare and the husband is not cooperating. Or we have a police officer who works the night shift and he can't get there to be with the children. Firemen are another example. So nurses, police officers, firemen, people that have the odd shift would be reasons why you'd have to cooperate. You can still do equal time sharing, but you need cooperation between the parties, which you don't always get in a divorce.
Right.
You try to
I think you would
them.
rarely get that without some judge telling you that you have to cooperate. Is that right?
Well, everybody's different. It's hard to predict by just experiencing people what they're going to do in a particular situation. And what is encouraging is that every so often you'll find someone who stands up and does the unexpected, does things that's selfless to help the other side. And that's the best part of human nature, because we see the other side as well. We see that people sometimes turn into their lowest means, that they almost turn into animals. They're so mean to each other. I've had cases where people from other countries that have gone through the journey of coming to the United States and becoming citizens, but when they go through a divorce, it's like old school ugliness.
Oh my goodness.
It's tough.
No, that would be tough. And I think all your years of helping families and individuals through family law, I think that really helps in your mediation practice too, doesn't it?
Well, I think, everything comes down to having the right attitude going in, which you're trying to solve a problem.
Right.
Because I think in this field of family law, but I think it probably extends to personal injury in other areas, is that what we're trying to do is solve a problem. And if we can change the dynamic of I'm going to win, which is it's a misnomer. Nobody really wins, especially in family law. By the time, Abraham Lincoln has this famous quote they found in his desk after he had passed. It's his note to law students. And he basically, in that note, you can Google it and find this, that he encourages young lawyers, law students to settle their cases because, the time and money it takes is not warranted. And I try to take that approach I mean, at least initially, there's some cases you have to try, but there's a whole bunch that maybe you don't if you take the right attitude, which is to be a problem solver. You're not here to win, you're here to solve a problem. How many ways is there to solve a problem? We still have to address the issues, but you don't take the dignity away of the other side. There was a Treaty of Versailles in World War I where the Allies beat up on Germany so bad, they had such a favorable treaty that it wound up, Germany came up with the Weimar Republic, Hitler came into power. So you got to be careful about winning too big. You want to give the other side enough dignity so that they can survive, give the husband enough money that he can live if you're representing the wife, so that you can be a problem solver. There's a role for a problem solver as an advocate, as opposed to just, I'm going to win at all costs and I'm going to take no prisoners and cause whatever damage is going to happen.
And I see that in personal injury as well, because I mean, you can fight the adjusters in our situation, even defense attorneys, but you can be just the hard nosed, big stick, cracking them over the head, and fight just to win, and you lose the credibility if you're fighting for arguments that aren't really worth fighting for. I think you lose the credibility on fighting for the issues that you deserve, that deserve a fight, and an argument. And then also, I think it helps in future cases. They know that you're going to be fighting, but reasonable, and advocating for your client. And I think it's more helpful that they know that you got somebody, a cooperative person on the other side that's going to fight for their clients, going to advocate as hard as they can, but they're not going to fight just to fight. And I think that's what you have in family law too.
Now, one of the distinctions that you have in personal injury, unless you agree to it, you're going to have a jury trial. You're not going to have a judge trial.
Right.
In family law, we don't get juries for the most part.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we're dealing with the same judges, and the judges get to know the lawyers. And I think the judges get to know the lawyers that, are problem solvers and the lawyers that are not.
Right.
And I think that and when you're dealing with eventually the trier of fact, who is the judge, it's helpful for them to know who's who. And I think, intuitively, that helps, because it's good to be able to say something to the court, and the court says, okay, I will accept what you're saying because I know who you are and I've had many cases with you, and I know you're going to do what you say you're going to do, as opposed to, turning a lawyer over to the bar or doing something negative to a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, we do have about 7 more minutes left in the show. So if you have a question, this is a live radio show, so you can call us with any questions you have. If you disagree with anything Patrick or myself may have said, we encourage that call as well. Call us at 727-441-3000, or jump on the Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers, and type in your question there on the live feed, and we'll be able to address those questions. But Patrick, we were talking about, up to now, we've been talking about getting to that closure. What happens in situations where you get the divorce and you think it's all done and everything is supposed to be going the way it's supposed to go, but it doesn't happen? What if the other person's not following the court order, or if there needs to be some modification? Can that be done, and how is that done?
Right. So what we talk about is there's the issue of enforcement. That's when someone doesn't follow what's plainly in the document, and the corners of the agreement are clear as to what someone can do, and they just intentionally don't follow it. Now, remember, we're typically in that situation looking at a parenting plan, which has been incorporated into a final judgment. So when you don't do what that parenting plan says, you're actually in violation of a court order, which can be contemptuous, and you can be held in contempt by the court, which could include, in the right circumstances, it's not something that's done right away immediately, but it could include jail, it could include fine, it could be sanctions. Hopefully we avoid that. Certainly we want to make sure that someone understands what they're reading. When someone doesn't follow a parenting plan or doesn't follow an agreement pursuant to its terms, typically reach out to that person's attorney and say, do you know what's going on here? Because you know what the consequences of this are.
Right. And you raised a good point, because the parenting plan, they could think they're just, it's just a parenting plan that was suggested, but no, it's a court order.
Yeah.
Because it's incorporated. Okay.
As is the marital settlement agreement itself, in terms of how you're going to, allocate the assets of the parties. But the other thing that is interesting about family law, as we were talking about change earlier in our discussion, there's aspects of this that can be modified and should be modified. So the two aspects are support obligations. So typically under our new alimony statute, we have what's durational alimony and that sort of thing, which goes for a duration, but it can be modified if the circumstances change. If one of the parties, for example, loses their job, if the payer loses his job, he can go in, he can seek either a temporary or permanent modification. The other thing is parenting plan. Children, of course, we set up, maybe it's equal time sharing, then something happens. Sometimes people fall into bad habits. They become addicted. They suffer mental illness that causes them no longer to be able to do what was originally planned to do. So what happens is a party is authorized in these areas where modification is possible to file the appropriate document, which is a supplemental petition to modify the final judgment. It does require a lot of the same kinds of drudgery of financial documents have to be produced. You have to go to mediation. It's like going through the divorce all over again. And you have to try to resolve it. So a large part of what lawyers do in family law certainly is including modification of previous orders because it's appropriate. Sometimes they say it's appropriate. From one side of the matter, it could be appropriate. Maybe the other side doesn't agree.
What about one parent wanting to move out of state with the child? That's the modification part?
Well, there's a specific statute. It's our relocation statute. United States and Florida in particular is a highly mobile place.
Sure. People
are coming in and out of here. You probably see in your practice too. People probably come down for a sporting event. They get into an accident. You got to represent them in that, and they go back home. Here, as you know, we've got a lot of people from other places, and I think the whole country's like that. But most of the population of the United States is in the eastern seaboard, and we have people from the north, typically a lot of retirees, but not just retirees, people who come here. And then sometimes they come here, they get married, they have children, and they long to go back to the green hills of Michigan. I had one case where a lady kept wanting to go back to Michigan. Well, it's a little bit different because once you're married and have kids, and now the spouse that you had that you're divorcing or have divorced has equal rights to you and has formed the basis of a relationship with those children, you just can't take those children away. So we have a whole method laid out in the statute where you have to say with particularity in your petition why you want to move, where you're going to move, where the children are going to go to school, a lot of specificity. It's served on the opposing party, the other spouse, former spouse, and that spouse then has so many days to object. Okay. And if there is an objection, you got to state what you're objecting about. And then under the statute, it's supposed to be given priority to go before the court to resolve it.
Oh, my goodness.
Like an emergency hearing. So It's very dramatic, can be very expensive,
and complex.
But it's a big part of being in Florida, being in the United States, moving around a lot.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. This past hour has been very, very helpful and very interesting. Patrick, if they need to get in contact with you, how can our listeners reach you?
Well, they can contact me through your firm, but other than that, Peacock, Gaffney, and Damanakis. It's we're on the internet. We have a web page. I'm easy to find if you just Google my name.
He's right in Clearwater, right next to our office as well.
Around the corner.
That's right. Well, we appreciate you listening to another edition of FLA Law on the Radio. As I always say, drive safely and watch out for those who don't. Good night.